Take me to the bank and punch me in the dick tonight. Anyways, whew, speaking of a dick punch, I want to talk about what I was talking about in that last clip. Well, technically second to last clip, but whatever. Where I was talking about the different dimensions. Because, like, most people can't grasp what a dimension is. I can't even really grasp it, so. But I use the analogy of we live in a 3D world. Well, imagine if we lived in a 2D world. In other words, roll out a map and put a ball on top of it. Now, where that 3D object, aka the ball, meets the map, anybody in a two-dimensional plane would not see a ball. They would see where said ball meets said map. In other words, it would be a matter of perception, basically, and perspective, I guess you could say. They would only perceive it from their understanding in a two-dimensional world. Now, we know that the ball has 3 dimensions. But they don't grasp that because they're not in third dimension. Which is actually kind of cool when you think about how that actually plays out. Now, excuse me, my fucking throat, dude. Anyways, now if we were to look beyond the third dimension, fourth being time, but let's say a fifth or sixth or seventh or eighth or ninth or 10th or 11th. They think there's 11, I guess. Let's forget all that. Let's just say the fifth dimension. Let's say the fifth dimension, there's something that's tangible on another plane of existence that touches our reality. Much like the 3D ball touches the 2D plane of the map. Excuse me. Now, if something in a fifth dimension, or sixth, seventh, eighth, whatever, were to touch our 3D dimension, it would then perform create a 3D object. And what if, I'm just throwing this out there, what if the stars and or planets are theoretically 3D representations of something from another dimension? In other words, those things are touching our 3D world, and this is what we see of it. For example, is a planet really a three-dimensional object? Not really. Not in the traditional sense. I mean, yes, it is, but it isn't, but it is, if you get what I'm saying. Like, if you're talking the core of the Earth, then okay, fine. But if you're looking at it as space, and then there's this little pocket where you go through an atmosphere and land on a ground somewhere, what exactly is all that? Is that theoretically, for example, is the atmosphere technically three-dimensional? Not really. Not in that sense. Is space three-dimensional? Not really. But yet, planets exist within that existence. Which is interesting because, especially if you take the fourth dimension, which would be time, the planets or stars, whatever, would be fixated where they are. Now, obviously, through gravitational shit or whatnot, they do revolve around. Okay, we get that. But they are essentially stationary within their orbit. You know what I mean? In other words, they're stationary in their movement, their pattern. Where, like, for example, where Jupiter is where Jupiter is. Now, granted, it revolves around the sun, but it's in its orbit. It's not going anywhere, necessarily. Because it's in the fourth dimension as well. Because to get to the third dimension, you have to go through the fourth. So in other words, it has to have time and space to manifest itself in a three-dimensional reality. Which, I mean, you could technically say that about almost anything. So when the Bible says things like, oh, the earth is two-dimensional, well, it has to be two-dimensional. It has to be flat. Earth has to be flat. Because It does. I mean, it just does. In other words, there's a flat two-dimensional variant of our existence. There just is. There's even a one-dimensional. Whatever the hell that actually is, I have no clue. But if you look at anything like math, I mean, 1, 2, 3, what's it do? It continuously goes, one extra. It's like 1, and then there's 2, and then there's 3, 4, 5, 6, so on and so forth. So in other words, you got dimension 1, dimension 2, and it builds upon itself each and every time. So we're looking at it from, we're like number 3. There has to be a 1 and a 2. And there has to be a 4, 5, 6, 7, whatever. And it could probably even go, I don't know. It could theoretically go a gazillion. I don't think it would go that far, but who knows? Why there's only 11 dimensions? I don't know. What are those 11 dimensions? I don't know. But what you're essentially talking about is, like, especially if you get into the 5th dimension, it has to be something that is beyond 3D, works within the 4D, which is basically means it's ever present. And what we see, and we would see it because it would be in a 3-dimensional object, it would be in a 3-dimensional space, especially if it can. I mean, no, there could be things that are not connected with us that's out there. And I'm not even talking like beings. Now, there is talk that, like in the Bible, that the stars are actually angels. I don't know how that works. I mean, they could be. They could be in another dimension. And what we're seeing, that bright light, is their connection to the physical, to our physical 3-dimensional world. Now, we look at it, oh, it's just a star. Well, okay, well, what is that star? Now, you can say, well, it's made up of 3-dimensional things and blah, blah, blah. Yes, it has to be made up of 3-dimensional things. Just like we have to be made up of 2-dimensional things as well. Because if we don't have the 2-dimensional things, you can't have the 3-dimension. I mean, you literally cannot have a 3-dimension without a 2-dimension. And as a result of that, we have to then assume that you need a 4th, which again would be time. 5th would be something else. So again, we could be seeing things in our physical world, and we're seeing them as what we see them as, but they're actually more profound than that. In other words, think of, well, for example, think of the 2-dimensional map, and you put like a little pin pricker in those little thumbtacks in there. Imagine if the stars are little thumbtacks. Now, we know those thumbtacks are physically 3-dimensional, but again, on the 2D dimension, on the 2D plane, all you're seeing is where they connect on that map. So in other words, if you're a 2D dimensional character, you're seeing just where it connects. You're seeing just basically a round thing. A little round boop. And if we take that to the next dimension, 4th and 5th, who's to say that and I'm using planets as an example. I mean, they could be almost anything. Who's to say that the planets are not just something more tangible in another dimension that's just connecting here? Because again, if anything connects here, it has to be in a 3-dimensional form, because that's all we can understand. So if you've got something that's in a 5th dimension, and then again, especially when you throw in time, because then time means it has to be there all times. For example, the planets are there all times. Jupiter is there all the time. Why? Because it has to get to the 3-dimensional, it has to go through the 4th dimension. Because obviously it's 5th, 4, 5, 4, 3, obviously. I mean, it works that way. I don't know. I find it fascinating. I could be completely retarded here. I don't know. And again, I'm using planets as a possible example. It may not be the best example, but hopefully you get what I'm trying to say. But again, I think it's absolutely fascinating that if you're trying to grasp what a 5th dimension is, like something in a 5th dimension, because to get to 5, you have to go through 4. So it has to have time as a variable. It then has to have 3. It has to be a 3D object, a physical 3D object. It has to have two flat Earth, if you will, flat plane of existence, and it has to have a 1D. Now, I don't know about zero and negative number. I don't know about that, but actually, you technically you technically don't need zero because zero would be zero. One, basically, you have nothing, and then you have one. You have plus one, and then you have plus two, then plus three, four, five. In other words, it builds upon itself, one after another. So if you have a 3D object, let's say even a human being or anything in visual range, and there's a fourth dimension, which we know there is, time, which explains why certain laws of like thermodynamics and entropy and things like that work, and why certain things break down after a while, because it's within time, and time basically fucks with those things. I mean, we get older by every second because we are essentially dictated to by that time. Now, is it possible to go back in time? I don't know. I do believe that time, and I've said this before, again, I could be completely wrong, but I do believe that time is happening all the time. In other words, past, present, future is all happening at one simultaneous moment. Now, you can even get into things like the rapture and shit with all this, because the Bible talks about there'll be, basically, it says that there'll be two men laying in a bed. Now, a lot of people say, well, that's homosexual stuff. It's a Mandela effect of talking about homosexual stuff. First off, no, because if you actually read what it's talking about, it's not even talking about that. Now, people want to say, oh, it's the rapture. You'll have two people, like one in a field, and one will be taken. That's not what that's about. If you actually read it, it's talking about the dual nature of human beings. In other words, there's a good and there's an evil. Like you see on TV, you got the little angel and the little demon on one shoulder and the angel on the other. It's that kind of concept. In other words, to be born again, the physical has to die. It's like the first shall be last and the last shall be first. Well, technically the first would be spirit, but right now we're talking first as in the time frame, our physical. So our physical has to give way to the spiritual. In other words, when Christ comes, he's not coming back for our physical bodies, he's coming back for our spirit. He's coming back for our soul. He's coming back for, our essence, who we are. And he's, like I said, he's not coming back for the physical. So the physical is going to die. The physical has to die before. In other words, what we are doing here, and this is why the whole thing about spiritual reward, spiritual, like heavenly treasures and shit, that's what all that's about. We have to give way of what we understand. Whether it's our past, whether it's just what somebody's done to us, we need to get rid of that. That is no longer, that is dead. That is literally dead. We are dead. If we are presently seated in heavenly places, which means we are physically dead. We haven't maybe got to that point yet. But if we are physically seated in heavenly places, then we've already achieved it. We are just now trying to go through the time stream to get there. So again, you put that in like the time concept. Time to me is very fascinating. Especially when you put it into like future events that are happening, running basically concurrent with our actual time right now. So, realistically, our past, present, and future is happening all at one time. Now, you put that in a perspective of a fifth dimension or sixth dimension making contact with our three dimensions, then yes, you would have things like a planet that is kind of just there. Now, there's certain other elements that do cause it to move. Again, gravity and whatnot. But, because, now, if the Bible's to be taken literally, and I do believe there's a literal aspect to a lot of it. A lot of people say, it's just symbolic. Okay, maybe, but it's talking literal physical things. When it says that the stars of heaven will fade. Now, naturally, that can't happen. Unless it was like some massive like rubber banding of the universe where it just kind of like said, "Oh fuck it," and came right back and like collapsed in on itself. But even still, like literally, if our sun right now exploded, I think it's like 6 minutes. We would see it explode, and before the wave like raped us and killed us all, we would be watching it for 6 minutes. We would see it before it actually happened, or something to that effect. However that works, or it happened before however it works. I confuse that, but you get my point. It's kind of like that. Like, for example, if the starlight is billions and billions of years away, that means that for that star to fall, it would have had to fall billions and billions of years ago. Which, again, if there was rubber banding of the universe and it sprung back, I suppose maybe that could work, but it would all have to be like simultaneous. Which, in a way, I guess it would be. If it did rubber band back, because it's expanding, and if it came back for whatever reason, I don't know why or how, you could maybe make that argument. But again, if we're talking that they're actually, I'll stick with just the stars, not necessarily the planets, because although I guess it could work. Like suns and shit, whatever. If they cease to give their light, well, technically, if the stars cease to give their light, then the planets cease to give their light too, because whatever. But if they are on another plane of dimension, in another dimension, working through the fourth dimension, then yes, they could theoretically basically the stars could fall from heaven simultaneously, even though they're billions and billions of light years away. Because what would be happening to them, especially if they're not what we think they are, because we wouldn't know what they are. We don't know what they are. We just know what we see in the physical three-dimensional world. In a fifth dimension, they could be something completely different. Like, for example, we, in a three-dimensional world, what would we look like to a two-dimensional being? Assuming there were such a thing. Let's say you put your finger on that map, and you blotted out this, you kind of like blotted out the sun. You don't know. I mean, that's the thing. So imagine a fifth dimensional creature, being, whatever, fucking with us like that. Like just putting your little finger on the little map. Again, you got a world map and you bloop, put your little finger on Russia. Blot out the sun. I mean, seriously, think about that. We don't know. We do not know. So yes, could they be actual beings? Could stars be actual beings? Could they be actual angels? Because the Bible suggests that they are. Because there's this really cool concept where certain ones like Lucifer, who were supposed to be doing what he was supposed to be doing, decided not to do that. Thus, he's quote unquote fallen, a fallen angel, a fallen star. He fell like lightning. I don't know. Again, take it for what it's worth. That is kind of a cool idea, though. Like all the other ones are doing all the other angels are doing what they're supposed to be doing, and we see them as stars because they are in another dimension, and we see where they make contact with the three-dimensional world. Again, something in another dimension making contact with a three-dimensional world would create a three-dimensional object. Just like if we put something on a two-dimensional map, like a rolled-out map, it would create essentially a 2D concept for them to understand and a 2D world. That's actually kind of fascinating when you think about it. So now for example, if you take, again, the map and you got a physical 3D ball, and you put the physical 3D ball on the map, and the map creates a 2D example for them to understand. Like they will see that and say, oh, that's a particle, or that's a atom, or that's a neutron, or that whatever they want to call it. And they see that and they're like, oh, but they don't know that it has three dimensions. So imagine if we see things here that have 3 dimensions, but it actually has fifth dimension, sixth dimension. So technically, everything has a fourth dimension. And we know that because, again, we get old. So we know we have a fourth dimension, or we're at least bound to the fourth dimension, just based upon, you know, like you get a car, it rusts out. You know, it is what it is. Your kids grow up. You get old, you die. It's like you born, you die. It's like we know that there's a fourth dimension. We are part of it. It affects us. I have no control over the fourth dimension. None of us do. So, what would a three-dimensional object look like in a fifth-dimensional realm? Now, again, you got to picture it as a 2D person looking at that ball on the map. Again, I don't know. It's really fascinating. I mean, it's really fascinating. Because you're talking about literal time and space where it's like this thing, whatever it be. And again, I'm using star as an example, and it may not even be a good example, like I said. But let's say a star does have a fifth dimension to it, and we're only seeing the 3 dimension. That means it would literally go through into another dimension and have a physicality in that other dimension. Think of it almost like a cylinder, like a block cylinder. And we're just seeing the round end of it. But it extends out further. Now, granted, technically you could see that it has a 3-dimensional shape, so obviously that's a little bit of a bad example. But actually not really, because if you look at it, you would see 3 dimensions. Like if you turned it just right, you would see the 3 dimensions. But it means that part of it then extends into another dimension that we can't see. I don't know, man. That's just fascinating to me. It is absolutely fascinating. Because it's some deep shit. Because, like, what if everything physical has a fifth dimension to it? Everything. I mean, again, everything has time. I buy toys and they get busted up, just sitting here. You know, just time, weathering. You know, whatnot. I don't know, man. That's just fascinating to me. Which is weird because if we can manipulate things in 3 dimension, are we technically manipulating things on fifth dimension? Because if we're creating things, now does everything have to have a fifth dimension? I don't know. I do believe that everything that has a 3 dimension has to have at least a 1 and a 2, because you have to have 1 and 2 to get to 3. And then 4, so 4 seems to be the kind of the cutoff. Now, for example, I'm holding this iPad. Does this iPad have a fifth dimension? I guess technically, in a way. I mean, you could maybe say Wi-Fi is the fifth dimension. You know, dude, I know. God, no, that's weird. That's weird thinking about that too. Holy shit. I mean, imagine if our soul is the fifth dimension. Or something, or maybe like the 10th dimension or some shit way out yonder. I mean, think about that. That is legit deep shit right there. That was honestly some deep, serious shit right there. Now, again, does everything have to have 3 dimension? Or, excuse me, 5 dimension? Not necessarily. No. I don't know. Could it work with a star? Now, again, we look at star, we think of it as a circle. Basically just a big 3-dimensional circle. But is there more to it? Could there be more to that? You know? We don't know that. We're not privy to that. I don't even know if there's a way to test that. Could you imagine if it was? You know? Because I saw this one thing on YouTube, and they had this weird hexagonal. It wasn't a hexagon, but it was. You know when they take those weird blocks, and they got the little round block, and they put the pegs in, and they make like things that look like elements and shit. Well, they had this one, and the woman was holding it, and the sun was beaming down, and you see the shadow, and like, okay, this is a three-dimensional object, but this is what it looks like in a two-dimensional plane. Now again, take it into the fifth dimension. I don't know, man. That's just weird to me. I mean, technically, you could almost say space is a fifth dimension in a way, because it's like we're here, and then there's something else out there. Although that's more still technically in the. Well, no, I don't know. I don't know. Maybe fifth dimension is sort of that. I don't know. But it'd be kind of weird, because like you can, space is tangible to a point. Like, yeah, no, space. I don't think space would be like a fifth dimension. I mean, it could, because again, they're talking dark matter, and they can't find 99% of it. Now, I don't know about all that. I don't know if that's a thing. You know, I'm not going to speculate on that. But, like, apparently they can't find 99% of the physical universe. Why? Because it's on a different plane of existence. It's in a different dimension. The sun, the moon, the stars, all that bullshit, Earth included, there's a fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth, whatever dimension to it. Again, we know Earth is bound by the fourth dimension, so we know we're at least in the fourth dimension. But could Earth itself have a fifth dimension? Now, granted, we see only the three dimension. I don't know, dude. That fascinates me on so many fucking levels. It just absolutely fascinates me. Because I've always said, like, for example, if we look microscopic, we can keep going, 2x, 3x, 4x, 5x. We can keep going down, way down to, like, particles and shit. And even what makes up particles. Well, what if we zoom the fuck out? What if instead of going down, we went up? What's beyond space? I don't know. Is it a fifth dimension? Because it's interesting, Lucifer said, put his throne above the stars. Well, what if the stars are the angels? In a fifth dimension, manifesting themselves in a three-dimensional world here. Because again, there's this fascinating concept, and it's in the Bible, and it's like the angels are supposed to be doing what they're doing, and Lucifer rebelled, and he fell like a star. Basically, he was like a star falling from heaven. He actually was a star falling from heaven. And that's fascinating when you think about it, because that means not only that, but he was on another plane of existence. He fell to this plane of existence. And technically, I guess when we fell, mankind fell from the garden, technically. I guess you could say maybe we went down a freaking notch. Maybe we were in the fourth dimension. Because, think about it. Fourth dimension, what would that entail? If everything, time and space is happening at once, we would be not only outside of time, but we would be basically in time. We would be part of time. In other words, I don't think we'd grow old, potentially. That could be a possibility, or we could grow old. I don't know. But if we were part of time, if we were actually in the fourth dimension, think about that. I don't think we would grow old. I think we would see everything as it was, or the way it was meant to be. So when we fell, we didn't just leave a garden. We got kicked out of the fourth dimension into the third dimension, where time now dictates on us that we get old and we die. Where when we were in the fourth dimension, which would be just like it is right now, except time would not be fucking us over. Think about that. That's some cool shit. Now, I did have the idea, and I'll briefly go over that basically, the more you get to the speed of light, the more time slows down to the point where you could theoretically get to either no time going forward, or it goes forward really slowly. And if God is light, and the Bible says he is light, the closer you get to light, so on and so forth. And the Bible says that God dwelt among Adam and Eve in the garden. So if he is light, then there would be theoretically a time dilation field around the garden where Adam and Eve never got old. The rest of the world, the rest of the universe would continue going on as normal. I don't know what the radius would be, obviously garden size. And the minute God left, then they're literally basically thrown out of the time loop. They're now put into normal time. That's some cool shit, actually. And there could be some truth to that. I don't know, but I think that's very cool. I think it's a very cool concept. I really do. Which, I mean, realistically, you could have had dinosaurs. You could have Adam and Eve and dinosaurs going on at the exact same time. Well, that was 65 million years ago when they died. So, they're in a time dilation field. Time would go slower then. Time would be going completely different. Now, you want to talk about creating the world in 6 days? If God is outside of time, because fourth dimension means we would be in time, fifth dimension means we would be outside of time. So if God is in at least the fifth dimension, hell, he can even be in the fourth dimension. It doesn't really matter. You could easily create the world in 6 days, and that's one thing that always pisses me off. Is you got all these people like, how could God create the world in 6 days? Dude, how do we do anything? I mean, seriously, how do we do anything? I mean, think about it. We used to have computers that were in warehouses, and all Big Blue did was play chess and blink lights. And now look at your cell phone in your hand. Look at the fucking watch, Apple Watch that you have, and the shit that it can do. That shit is absolutely amazing, and how small it is. So you're telling me that, yeah, okay, it took 65 million years in the norm, in the natural, but you're telling me something couldn't create the world in 6 days? Honestly, you're telling me that's not a thing? Because again, we keep hearing about, like, Republicans want to keep throwing out, like, oh, the American spirit to, make things better, to create things and to make things better. Honestly, God, you're telling me that in the realm of reality that can't happen? Forget different dimensions. Honestly, God, you're telling me that creating a world in 6 days just is not feasible on any level. Yet, I mean, think about it. We have medicine today that can cure things in days instead of months and weeks. We're constantly trying to get smaller and better. I mean, seriously, look at memory in any type of computer. It's gotten smaller and it's gotten bigger. And if we're going with that on every single solitary level, I don't know, that kind of a limitation on reality is weird to me, because every other thing we see says that's not true. That's not the case. Yeah, we can't create it. Well, then just, listen, I understand it gets all hokey pokey and, bullshit with God. Like, oh, there's a God and he exists. And no, I believe he exists, but I can understand, like, everybody else who don't believe in God saying, that. Okay, fine. Let's not even talk about that. It doesn't even have to be God. You're telling me that... forget the universe. You're telling me that an alien race who's terraforming planets couldn't terraform this planet in 6 days. Seriously? Honestly? You telling me they couldn't take a 3D printer, instead of printing like little plastic shit and little tinker toys and shit, that it works with, I don't know, DNA and organic material, that they couldn't create something in 6 days? Now let's get a little crazy with that. If we are in a holographic universe, then yes, you could create the universe in 6 fucking days. You could absolutely create the world in 6 days. If God is outside of time, yes, you could create the world in 6 days. Let's say it took 24 hours to upload the thing. So he created everything in a patch outside of time and then uploaded it to our whatever server, and it took 24 hours to upload. You could definitely create the world in 6 days. So this idea, and it's not because I want to prove God or I believe in God and therefore God created it and Jesus said it, I believe it. This isn't some bumper sticker, motherfucker. I don't even care about all that. I don't even care about trying to appease God on some level and try to make him viable. I'm just saying, just as a natural, it's not impossible. It's impossible for our understanding because it's like, well, the rocks took like a gazillion billion years to form and blah, blah, blah. Okay. Okay. But again, if you're looking at it from a holographic universe, what you're talking about is you would code in the fact that, yes, a rock would take a billion years to form, let's just say. Whatever. 1 billion years, whatever. Well, if you're a computer programmer and you put a rock in there, and it has the parameters of, yes, it took a billion years to create, but we created it instantly. It's just, I don't know. That's just weird to me because it's like, I know how things work. Like, for example, Adam and Eve. You could create Adam and Eve without them actually having been given birth. Like, Adam and Eve didn't have belly buttons. Well, how is that possible? How are they human beings if they don't have belly buttons? Now, I do think possibly I would have, my own personal thing, I assume God would have created them as such, so they would have a navel region, but whatever. It wouldn't have been functional because they didn't actually physically have mothers and fathers. You know, they didn't have parents in a physical sense. But yet when they were created, I mean, seriously, if you're creating something in a test tube, you don't need a backstory. The backstory is already there. You're the backstory. You created it to then go and mass produce the way it does. So, like, for example, you look at normal people today, it's like, well, they came from their mother's womb. There's a navel. You know, there was an umbilical cord. So the first people must have had umbilical cords. No! It doesn't have to work that way. It doesn't. You know? I'm sorry. It's just, that doesn't have to work that way. You know? Because, again, we're looking at it from a certain perspective. We're looking at it from the natural, the norm. And the natural and norm says, yes, it took 9 months to, you know, from fertilization of the egg to birth of the child. It took 9 months. Well, at some point, like, for example, what came first, the chicken or the egg? The chicken had to come first. Why? Because only a chicken can create the enzyme that's in the eggshell. The eggshell couldn't come first. It just couldn't. So a chicken had to be first. Well, where did the first one come from? I don't know. Obviously, something manifested into being. That's the only other logical option. That something created it. Now, like, for example, they got this thing, Nintendo Labo, and they're coming out with this little miniature VR system. Apparently, they have this thing where you can make these little mini games and shit, where you take these things and you kind of move them around and you like connect them and you do things and like you say this action connects to this action and then text appears and you type in the text and you make all these things, and when you look at the way those are created, it's not that much different than biological. Now, yes, it's a little more complex, obviously, duh, but you get my point. And again, you don't even need a spirit. You don't even need some hocus pocus god. You can have a dude, a Sumerian prick in a planet 10. Yes, it's planet 10. Fuck you. Planet 9. Bullshit. Planet 10. Fuck you. Riding around out in space somewhere. Sprays these fucking sprockets. Flying overhead and terraforming the fucking planet. You could have that very easily. That's not on the realm of possibility. It's not. It's absolutely not out of the realm of possibility. But yet, people want to look at it. It can't be. It can't be. It just can't be. It doesn't work that way. Says who? You're looking at it from only 3 fucking dimensions. I'm trying to look at it from like 18 different dimensions. Okay? Listen, you go 5th dimension, anything can happen. Your shit's outside of time, all bets are off. Now, if I was trying to create the universe, it would take more than 6 days. Yes. Yes, it would. If you tried to create the universe, it would take more than 6 fucking days. That doesn't mean the universe didn't get created in 6 days. You're talking about layer upon layer upon layer. Does it take 6 days to go from 1 to 2? Does it take 1,000,000 years to go from 2 to 3? No. It doesn't. I mean, think about it. Math is a very interesting thing. I mean, you intermingle things like math and just wave frequencies, which is basically another form of math in and of itself. And you're talking music, you're talking a whole slew of shit that makes up the fucking universe. And yet we're sitting here in our profound knowledge of nothing saying, oh, well, it can't happen. It's impossible. You can't create a world in 6 days. It's 1,000,000 years old. That's bullshit. That's bullshit. That right there is bullshit. Anyways, you know what? Like I said, I find it a fascinating subject. I really do. Absolutely find it a fascinating subject. But again, how do you take a 3-dimensional object, expand it into something more? I mean, you would essentially have to envision it more. I'm trying to think. Like, imagine if everything is made up of pixels. Imagine if every pixel was like a pencil. Like, think of a pencil, that kind of a shape, and the points of the pencil are the pixels that create a 3-dimensional object, but yet the pencil itself continues off into like something else. So think about like a 3-dimensional object that has all these things just sticking out of it. I mean, and that's not even like a realistic representation of 5th dimension. Because it would have to be... And I use the planets for a reason. I use the stars and the planets for a reason. Because you're talking space, and you're talking something that's just there. Now, you say, well, gas is formed and things and blah, blah, blah. But there's something physically there that's manifest there. And if we're looking outside of that in a deeper meaning, and there's like something more profound, like I said earlier, that is touching our 3-dimensional universe, then what we are seeing, yes, would be a 3-dimensional object, but it extends beyond that. And I'm trying to grasp how that would work, because again, you're talking about a 3-dimensional object that goes beyond 3 dimensions. It goes into something more. We'd have to try to even understand what that something more is. Like, I mean, could it be a spiritual thing? Like, what if the sun has a spiritual entity assigned to it? What if it is an actual spiritual entity? That spiritual entity, that spiritual being, would transcend beyond the 3-dimensional world. I mean, think about that. Now, I'm using that as a poor example, but you get my point. Like, in other words, there's more tangibility to it than what we're giving it credit for. We see it and it's like, oh, that's tangible, it's 3 dimensions, it is what it is. But if it goes beyond, like, for example, you look at a human being and they don't say anything, you don't know if they have a soul. You assume they do, but you don't know. They speak and they have thought and they have consciousness. Okay, then you're like, oh, that transcends beyond the physical 3-dimensional world. You see their 3-dimensional body, but you don't see their spiritual that, like I said, transcends into other parts of existence. Now, their spiritual personhood, which may be, let's say, level 5, level 6, level 7, level 8, whatever, has to go through level 4, time and space, into a physical body, which is now dictated to by time and space. So now you have a spiritual being who doesn't die, who's in a physical body that gets old and does die. Dude, that is profound fucking shit, and I am so glad I brought it to you. Fuck you. That is some legitimately profound, fucking found bullshit. That, dude, I should be. I swear to God, man, I should be doing theoretical physics somewhere. Fuck me. Fuck me. My real calling. Jesus. I'm telling you. Now, again, I'm simplifying everything, obviously. Because I'm only looking at it from, like, the 5th dimension. I mean, shit, they say there's 11 fucking dimensions, for Christ's sake. What does a fucking 11th dimension look like? And what if the 11th dimension connects and makes contact with 3-dimensional? We would see a 3-dimensional object that has 11 other, 11 dimensions total. That's crazy shit, dude. That is crazy. I mean, you can almost, seriously, you can almost look at your children as like another dimension. For example, your parents had you. You transcended their understanding. You became a being unto yourself. They were 1 and 2. They were 1. You became 2. Your children are now 3. Their children will be 4. aka dimensions. You can almost look at it like that, too. Where God said, go into all the world and, preach the gospel of Christ. Go into all the world and, reproduce, basically. It's the same thing he told Adam. And it's the same thing Christ told the disciples. Go fruitful and multiply. Go into different basically create different dimensions. Now, granted, that's more, again, simplified, but you can almost look at it from that point of view. In other words, your kids are not you. You are not your parents. Kind of a deal. But yet, we all came from number 1, We all came from Adam. Adam led into number 2, number 3, so on and forth, blah, 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 blah. Now, granted, it could go up to like a gazillion, but whatever. Now, again, that's overly. I'm trying to get it so you can. I'm trying to get it so that you and I can understand what I'm referring to, and I'm using that as like a very not 100% example, but an example that you grasp what I'm saying. Like, in other words, you go from 3rd dimension to 4th dimension, 5th dimension. It would be very similar to, like, for example, your grandkids can't happen if your parents didn't have you. In other words, you can't have grandkids if you didn't exist. It's almost like the grandfather paradox in a way. Which I don't know if I believe in the grandfather paradox. I think matter matters, especially in the grand scheme of reality. So you go back to your grandfather. Technically, I think your grandfather still exists. You would kill him in the moment, but the rest of the moments that go on, you literally have to kill your grandfather every second. No, I don't know about that, but like people say, oh, you go back to your grandfather, you cease to exist. I don't think you do. I think matter matters. Once your grandfather had your father, and then your father had you and your father matter. You're there. I don't know, because then you get into like alternate universes and things like that. And I think time, it's weird. It's like, I don't think it's linear, but I do think it's linear, if you get what I mean. It's like there's a gazillion possibilities, and then the universe settles on one. And then there's, for the next second, a gazillion possibilities. It settles on number 2. 3, 4, 5, 6. It's, again, I use the Lego tower. You put one block down, you put another block, and you build this huge ass tower. Now, out of all the Lego blocks you had reds and blues and greens and whatnot. But whatever is there is there. In other words, it's what became of the options that you had available. Now you could go in and take out, let's say, the red one that's like, you know, 10, 10 stacks high. You go and take the red one out. Well, the rest of the stacks still apply. They're still there because they happened, and they, you know, either that or it would create it would literally create a paradox where the entire universe implodes and we all die. Whatever. But let's not dwell on that. Anyways, I want to get into other stuff, but not right now because I'm tired. Cause I got a bunch of Israel shit that I want to talk about, and Trump and end time bullshit. That's gonna be the next clip. I don't know when. Maybe tomorrow, the next day, whatever. But I don't know. I wanted to talk about this because trying to understand dimensions is just fucked up. I mean, there's no nice way to say it. It's just completely. And yes, for the record, I have been trying not to say the F word as much. And I've been doing a pretty fucking good job, if I do say so my fucking self. So fuck you. But whatever. You gotta get it in there. You gotta get it in there. Anyways. Again, I mean, I want to just... No, again, I was using stars as an example, because the Bible suggests certain things. Now, whether it's legitimately real or it's symbolic, they represent this or they represent that, fine. But could it represent a literal physical reality? You look at it and say, well, it's a star, it's not an angel. Unless you look at it from a different dimension. If that angel is connecting to our three-dimensional world, then what you see as a star is that angel. And again, it'd be no different than you put the ball on the 2D map. What do the 2D people see? They don't see a physical ball. They don't see an actual ball. They see where it connects on that map. It's it's like the particles and shit. And all that stuff, and the shit disappears, and they're like, where'd that shit go? Basically, it's still there, but it's just not connected to our world anymore. How does that work? I don't know. It's almost like quantum entanglement, too. You can throw that shit in there, too, as well. I mean, I don't know how... I don't want to get into that, because that's going to take another hour. But, I mean, dude, there's so much shit I mean, I don't know, man. I just think it's fascinating. Because we have to think beyond what we can understand. That's the whole point. That's God, that's science, that's mysticism, magic, Gnosticism, whatever you want to call it. Occultism. Thinking beyond what we understand. And I'm sorry, I don't need no fucking crystal ball to see some asshole demon telling me, oh, I don't need that shit. I got a mind of my own, motherfucker. I can conjure up any damn thing I want. Real or not. So fuck you. But again, I mean, it's just to be like somebody punching you in the face. Somebody punch you in the face, and for that split second, is that fist is hitting your eye. Are you seeing a fist? No, you're seeing this big black, bloop. You're not seeing the actual fist. You're seeing where it connected. Now you pull back, you see a fist, you see a person, you see an attitude behind said person who did the punching. There's a whole slew of outside stimuli that you're not gauging in simply because it's on a different plane of existence. So, for example, let's say the angels, whatever that is, fallen or otherwise, the stars of heaven, the angels, whatever. Let's say the lights, the little lights in the sky, are angels. Let's just say that. Just they're on a different plane of existence, and we see them as physical, three-dimensional suns, if you will. Which would be kind of interesting because they would be mimicking Christ in a way. Because their light would, manifest to the planets around them, which would light them up, and you'd be able to see the different little systems and whatnot. surrounding each one, you know. I don't know. But let's just say that's the case. Then that star has a physical entity that transcends the third dimension. There's a motivation behind what that entity is doing, good or bad. And it does what it does for whatever reason. Now, let's say there was an extra star out there that was Lucifer or whatever. Now, the other stars see what happened to him. They're like, shit, I'm going to stay right here. I'm going to stay right here and do what the fuck I'm supposed to be doing. Now, again, what's interesting is because it's in time, they don't have to be stationary there for millennia. You know, that's not how that works. Because if they have to go through the fourth dimension, or even fifth dimension could even be another variant of time. We don't know that. Because you have time where it's like you go from young to old, and then you die. The fifth dimension could be, now you're like completely eternal. In other words, it's a step up. So in other words, it's like a 2 to a 3. 3 is greater than 2. So the fifth dimension, if it's still dealing with time on some level, but let's say, a greater variant of it, where all the bullshit no longer applies. So in other words, like if we were in a fifth dimension, everything would be good. We'd still have time. We'd still look up at the clock and say, oh, it's 12 o'clock. But we wouldn't get older. We wouldn't die. We would just stay where we are right now. Now, if we go into the fourth dimension, then we, get old and die. I know that's kind of cool, too, when you think about that. So if you've got, let's say, a sixth-dimensional being who has to go through 5 to 4 to 3, then guess what? For even a split second where they are, those stars would be there for eternity. They don't have to actually sit there for eternity because they're outside of all that. If they're there even for a second, it's there for eternity. Which, now think about that. 6 days of creation. Oh, it took 1 billion years for the rock to form. Yeah, on a 3-dimensional level it did. Now you talk about a 5th-dimensional level, it happened instantaneous. And if you've got God who's like, let's say, the 11th dimension, dude, I mean, and what I'm saying is not far-fetched. It may be a little hokey and like, oh, you're trying to add God into science and blah, blah, blah. Yeah, okay, fine. I admit, as a Christian, I'm trying to make God understandable. But you don't even need God. You don't even need God. You can be the most atheist prick there is. What I'm saying, there's some truth to what I'm saying. Potentially. I'm not saying that's how it is. I'm saying that's how it could be. So take it for what it's worth. But again, if you got fifth dimension that is now time, but time that's like standing still. Now, how would a fourth dimensional time that makes you get older and die affect a 2-dimension or a 1-dimension? Because if you notice, the 5th dimension is greater than the 4th dimension. So that time and space, because like the Bible talks about, death being swallowed up, the sting of death and all that shit, and an end to death means the 4th dimension means we have died, and now we have gone beyond the 4th dimension into the 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th dimension. As a spirit, we are no longer bound by that. So death will eventually die because there will be nothing left for it to kill because it's on a plane of existence beyond what we need to understand. That's kind of cool too when you think about it. That's really cool, actually. So again, you put all that shit into perspective, that's really some deep shit. Like, for example, what would a tangible soul look like in a 3-dimensional world? Does it look like us? I don't know about that. I don't know. Could it look like a sun? Could the glory of God, don't hide your light under a bushel kind of concept. Could it be? You know, I mean, space is expanding, which means stars are forming, people are dying. Maybe the stars really are people at another dimension. We are seeing them in a three-dimensional plane when they're in another dimension beyond that. But again, it's their physical representation in the three-dimensional world. That could be a little You can take that for what it's worth, but again, I'm just throwing it out there as what if. Because that'd be cool. And I'm not going to lie, that'd be kind of cool. Now, the only real problem is, for example, could we blow up a sun? I think we could, realistically. So, a lower dimension could affect a higher dimension on some level. It'd almost be like bacteria. You got bacteria in your colon eating away at your asshole, you know, eating away at your asshole. You don't see it, but it's there. So what if that... So again, what if we are like cancer to a 8th dimension? You know? Who knows? I mean, that's actually kind of cool when you think about that, too. But if that's the case, then we could theoretically destroy something that's outside of time. Could we destroy God? I mean, vain imagination. That's what they tried to do at the Tower of Babel, literally. Could we destroy God? Or, you know, some variant thereof. Because again, they manipulate us because they're on a higher plane of existence. Can we manipulate them? Because if they're manifesting themselves in a three-dimensional world, we could be poking at, you know... Basically, it'd be like... A great example, when you sit your ass in one of those little inner tubes in the pool, and your ass cheeks are like in the little round bubble. That's kind of what it's like. Well, imagine if somebody's under the water with a little stick poking it up your ass. That's what I'm talking about. In other words, can we shoot God in the ass, basically? And not God, but like a collective spiritual sense. Could we do that? I don't know. That'd be kind of weird. Actually, that'd be kind of weird. Actually, that's a great word picture. You think about that. You got the little fat kid in a little inner tube. His ass is like poking down under the water. That's what it's like a different dimensional being poking his ass into the three-dimensional, and all you see is like just his ass cheeks. That's kind of the equivalent. That's actually what it is. That's kind of deep. That's very deep. Anyways, I'm done. I gotta pee. Damn it, I gotta pee. I gotta pee. So I gotta end this. Anyways, that's it. Fuck you.